If you take a walk down like a typical suburban street at around 9 o'clock at night, and you look at the houses, you see something incredibly specific. You don't see a single warm, glowing hearth radiating from the center of the home.
Right, no firelight.
Exactly. Instead, you see these faint blue rectangles glowing in separate darkened rooms. Everyone is home, but everyone is completely isolated in their own private digital atmosphere.
And that physical isolation is, I mean, it's a profoundly recent anomaly in human history. We're sitting under the same roof, but psychologically, we are operating in entirely different, disconnected universes.
It's wild, and that image, that is the very heart of our deep dive today. We are exploring the lost art of communal storytelling. Because we live in this wild paradox, you, me, the listener we're talking to right now, we consume more narrative content than any generation that has ever walked the earth.
Oh, absolute avalanche of story.
An avalanche. But we consume it almost entirely alone, funneled through earbuds and algorithmically curated feeds. So our mission today is to really unpack what happens to the human psyche when that gathered circle breaks.
Yeah, because we're looking at a pretty diverse stack of sources today.
We really are.
Yeah.
We're diving into anthropological papers on folklore, media history texts, analyzing domestic life, and some really fascinating sociological studies on our current audio boom. And the central thesis running through all of this is that the magic of a story doesn't actually live in the ink on a page or like the pixels on a screen.
Yeah.
It lives in the physical air between the teller and the listener.
Totally. And to truly understand the gravity of what we've lost, we really have to look at the historical baseline. Because for thousands of years, storytelling was not a private act of consumption. It just wasn't.
It was an event.
Exactly. A shared physical event. It happened around campfires, in parlors, in the center of village squares. An audience leaned in together. Their heart rates literally synced up. They breathed at the same time, they laughed at the same time, and they feared at the same time. The storyteller anchoring that room held a really profound social function.
When I was digging into the media history text from our stack, the part that really struck me was just how recently that shared physical event evaporated from our daily lives. Like, we aren't talking about ancient Roman history here.
No, not at all.
We can pinpoint the collapse of the shared story directly to the decline of the 19th century domestic parlor tradition.
Yeah.
It's like roughly between 1880 and 1930 that the domestic space was entirely rewired.
Yeah, the actual architecture of gathering changed. First, it was the introduction of the radio. Suddenly, a voice from the outside world could be beamed directly into the home.
Right.
Then came recorded music, and finally, television. So the human performer in the room was systematically replaced by a broadcasted signal.
Let's visualize that contrast for a second, because the mechanics of that shift are just fascinating. Picture a bustling 19th century salon or a parlor. Friends and family are physically oriented toward each other, right? Someone sits in the designated storytelling chair, or maybe they're playing the parlor piano.
And the room gets quiet.
Yes, but it's an expectant, shared quiet. You hear the crackle of the fire, maybe the creak of the floorboards. The entire group is focused on a single, breathing human performer in the room.
Right.
Now, fast forward to a modern living room. You have a family of 4 sitting on a sprawling sectional couch.
Yeah.
There's total silence. But it's not expectant. It's the dead silence of 4 people staring at 4 different smartphones.
Yeah, the parlor piano is gone.
The storytelling chair is empty. The gathering has dissolved into parallel consumption.
Parallel consumption, exactly. We traded an active collaborative event for passive receiving. But, tracing the origin of that parallel consumption requires looking further back than the radio or the television. The broadcast era really just finished a job that started centuries earlier.
Okay, wait, I'm going to push back on that 1880 timeline a bit, because the sources point to a much earlier culprit for that initial fracture. I mean, books existed long before the 19th century.
Yeah.
People were reading sprawling novels in the 1700s.
Well, sure they were.
So why blame modern tech? The true paradigm shift, the technology that fundamentally altered the psychology of storytelling, was the mass printing press, right?
Absolutely. The printing press is the invisible wedge here. Before mass printing, a story was ephemeral. It was an experience that happened in real time, and it inherently required a group. The printing press took that shared real-time event and transformed it into a solitary physical commodity.
And the mechanics of that shift completely change how the brain processes the narrative.
Mm.
When you read a mass-printed book silently to yourself, you strip away the breath, the pauses, the eye contact of the teller.
You're completely isolated with the text.
Right. You take a synchronized group physiological response and flatten it into private interpretation. I mean, you can pause, skip ahead, disagree internally, all without any social pressure or communal cue.
And the silent reader is actually a remarkably modern psychological phenomenon. For most of history, even if someone had a manuscript, they read it aloud.
Because early texts lack standardized punctuation, right?
Exactly. You literally had to vocalize the words to understand the phrasing. Mass printing standardized the text to the point where silent, private consumption just became the default. It turned a communal ritual into an individual product.
It's almost like taking a sprawling, chaotic, beautifully cooked meal meant for a massive family gathering and, like, vacuum sealing it into millions of individual frozen TV dinners.
Oh, that's a great way to put it. Yeah.
You're still getting the calories, you're still getting the plot of the story, but the entire social utility of the meal has been completely stripped away.
And that analogy perfectly sets up the next layer of the research we looked at. Because if the printing press dismantled the communal story by turning it into a private commodity, we really have to ask what the actual function of that communal story was in the first place.
Right, moving from where we consume stories to why our ancestors even needed them.
Because when you do that, you uncover a much deeper layer of human psychology.
This is where anthropologist William Bascom's work comes in, and I loved this part of the sources. It completely reframes how we look at folklore. Bascom outlined the 4 functions of folklore, basically proving that early oral storytelling was absolutely never just about passing the time.
No, it was highly functional.
He argued it served 4 simultaneous purposes. First, it validated culture-like. It explained why the world is the way it is. Second, it educated people with practical knowledge.
Third, it maintained social norms by enforcing taboos.
Exactly. And fourth, it provided psychological escape through a thrilling narrative.
And the absolute genius of the oral tradition is that it managed to hit all 4 of those targets in a single breath. The storyteller in the village square wasn't just, entertaining the crowd.
They were working on so many levels.
Right. They were reinforcing the community's identity, passing down survival skills, keeping rebellious members in line with social expectations, and giving everyone a break from their grueling labor all at once.
Whereas today, our media diet is just highly fragmented. We split all those functions up. If we want to get educated, we watch a documentary.
We read the news to understand cultural norms.
Right. And we consume solitary fiction almost exclusively for that 4th function, psychological escape. We just want to zone out and disconnect from our reality. But historically, stories were the very mechanisms designed to anchor you to your reality and bind you to your community.
And we can see this stark contrast really clearly when we look at the mechanics of specific genres, like the ghost story. The modern horror movie or thriller is designed to deliver a solitary adrenaline spike.
Yeah, you watch it alone in the dark, you get a jump scare, you move on.
But historically, the ghost story was heavy-duty cultural glue.
Oh, totally. The Campfire ghost story wasn't just a spooky tale designed to make kids shriek. It was a highly engineered survival mechanism. I mean, think about the physical staging of it. The darkness at the edge of the firelight basically acts as a physical prop.
It creates a boundary.
Exactly. The storyteller drops their volume to a whisper, forcing the audience to lean physically closer to the heat and closer to each other. Then they tell a story about a monster in the dark woods. But that monster is just a narrative proxy for actual predators or rival tribes.
Right. The story educated the children on the very real dangers of wandering away from the camp.
And it maintained the social norm of staying close to the safety of the group.
And urban legends carried that exact same functional architecture right into the modern city. They encoded our collective social anxieties into a digestible narrative.
Like the classic story about the teenager finding a hook hanging on the car door handle after parking on Lover's Lane.
Oh yeah, the Hook Man.
That isn't just some random scary story. That is a society actively working through its collective anxiety about teenagers gaining independence, getting cars, and leaving the watchful eye of the community. It's shared fear with a highly specific social purpose.
Because the structure of shared fear actually bonds people. Experiencing a spike of cortisol and adrenaline in a group, and then experiencing the collective release of tension when the story ends, That creates deep neurological trust.
Wow.
Modern solo horror completely abandons that structure because fear experienced in total isolation doesn't bond you to anyone. It just leaves you
That's
anxious.
anxious in your bed.
Yeah.
But, the sources do highlight one brilliant modern exception that actually managed to capture this lost art, which is Alvin Schwartz's book series, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark.
Oh, those were terrifying.
Right. The sociological texts we reviewed hold this up as a rare example of true campfire literature, because Schwartz understood that a ghost story loses its power if it's just read silently in bed. So he engineered the books to force a
These
performance.
built-in stage directions.
Literally. The text tells the reader when to pause, when to drop their voice to a whisper, and when to suddenly yell to make the person next to them jump. He used typography and phrasing to basically train the solitary reader to become a communal vessel. He really understood the shape of shared fear.
He essentially handed the reader a blueprint to rebuild the campfire right there in their own bedroom. He recognized that the person delivering the story is just as critical as the narrative itself in anchoring the room.
So I want you, the listener, to reflect on your own media diet for a moment. Think about the last 5 things you watched, read, or listened to. When was the last time a piece of media actually made you feel more tethered to the people physically sitting in the room with you, rather than just offering, like, an escape hatch to ignore them?
It's rare, because the modern media ecosystem is explicitly engineered to pull our attention out of our physical environment. The algorithms are designed to sever our connection to the room. But historically, a shared experience required a specific architect to build that space.
You couldn't just have a story.
No, you need a keeper of the fire.
Which brings us to the people who were actually responsible for carrying this cultural weight. Because the historical storyteller was fundamentally different from, say, the modern actor reading a script.
Oh, entirely different. Across global traditions, the storyteller held a formal, indispensable social rank. Look at the West African griot. In that tradition, stories are not public domain. They are literally owned by specific families and passed down as a strict inheritance.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, a griot serves as the community's historian, diplomat, and advisor, or consider the Irish Shronche. This was a professional keeper of lore who held a deeply ceremonial role in rural communities, traveling from house to house to deliver lineage, myth, and news.
And we see similar vital anchoring roles in the Appalachian porch storytelling tradition here in the U.S.
Exactly. The paradigm shift between how we view a storyteller today versus how they were viewed historically is profound. Today, we default to the concept of the performer.
Right, we put a storyteller on a brightly lit stage, we plunge the audience into darkness, and we just passively judge their individual talent, their acting skills, their charisma.
But the historical sources emphasize that these ancient storytellers did not view themselves as performers at all. They viewed themselves as vessels.
Vessels. That word captures the mechanism perfectly. The griot or the chanche wasn't performing to show off. They were conjuring an ancestral memory.
The magic didn't originate inside them.
No, it existed in the physical space between the teller and the audience. The storyteller was simply the conduit that allowed the narrative to enter the room. It was this act of collaborative imagination, heavily reliant on the audience's real-time feedback.
Yeah, and there is a brilliant quote in our sources from the legendary audiobook narrator George Cadell that really captures the endurance of this dynamic.
Oh, I love this quote.
He notes that despite all our technological advancements, the cave is now the SUV.
It's just a masterful distillation of our current audio landscape. Let's unpack the mechanics of that for a second, because it hits on a deep neurological truth. Think about a commuter stuck in gridlock traffic, driving alone in a massive metal SUV, listening to a dense audiobook.
Visually, that is the ultimate symbol of modern solitary isolation.
Exactly. You are trapped in a metal box on a sprawling highway. But structurally, psychologically, the tribal nature of listening to a human voice remains completely intact. You are sitting in an enclosed, dark space, listening to the elder by the fire.
Because the human voice carries microscopic imperfections.
Right. The slight intake of breath, the parting of lips, the subtle shifts in cadence, stuff that ink on a printed page simply cannot replicate.
Ink is static. It's a finalized product. A voice is alive, and it requires time to unfold. Guidall is pointing out that while our physical environment has mutated drastically, moving from the cave to the 19th century parlor to the insulated SUV, our neurological wiring hasn't changed a bit.
We are still a species that craves the deep intimacy of being directly spoken to.
Absolutely. Which perfectly explains the massive cultural shift we are living through right now. If the cave is the SUV, we are subconsciously trying to rebuild this ancient campfire everywhere we can.
We really are. We're seeing an absolute explosion in audio formats, podcasts, audiobooks, ASMR, and dedicated sleep stories on apps like Calm or podcasts like Sleep With Me.
And for years, tech analysts treated this audio boom as just another technological novelty, right? Or just a way to multitask while doing the dishes.
But it isn't a novelty. It's a psychological homecoming. Think about it. For over a century, we have been subjected to absolute visual dominance. Screens have grown larger, brighter, faster, and more hyperkinetic, constantly demanding immense processing power from our visual cortex.
Audiences are fundamentally exhausted.
Exactly. The surge in long-form audio is a collective societal realization of what it feels like to just close our eyes, surrender the visual overload, and listen.
Now, you might look at our current digital landscape and say, wait, social media is full of people talking directly to the camera.
Right, Instagram literally have a feature called Stories. TikTok is entirely built on people telling you things.
But mechanistically, those platforms are the exact opposite of the oral tradition. The terminology is borrowed, but the application is inverted. Social media completely fails the ancient Greek tradition.
Because it operates like a slot machine in a crowded casino, you might be sitting in a room full of people, but the algorithm creates this psychological tunnel vision that eliminates your physical surroundings entirely.
It serves up highly fragmented, decontextualized content at breakneck speed.
It's engineered for rapid-fire, solitary consumption. It completely lacks the unhurried pacing, the shared space, and the physical grounding of a campfire. I mean, you aren't syncing your heartbeat with a TikTok algorithm. You're holding your breath while you desperately scroll for the next hit of dopamine.
The oral tradition requires patience. It requires a surrender to the pacing of the teller. Social media, on the other hand, trains us to demand immediate gratification and gives us the power to swipe away the teller the second we feel a dip in stimulation.
It's so true. Just think about the habits of millions of people right now, maybe even you, listening to this deep dive. Millions fall asleep every single night to slow, atmospheric fiction podcasts or dedicated sleep stories.
Just a single, calm voice talking about nothing in particular.
And this sociological research suggests these listeners might not even realize what they are actually hungry for. They aren't just seeking a cure for insomnia, they are starved for the parlor.
They are desperate for a voice in the dark that isn't performing at them to gain followers or selling to them, but is simply speaking to them.
A steady, non-threatening cadence.
Exactly. It signals to the most primal part of our lizard brain that the environment is safe. It tells us that the lookout by the fire is calm, there are no predators nearby, and for this specific moment, everything is okay. It's a return to our oldest biological comfort.
And this hunger isn't only manifesting digitally either. The sources highlight incredible physical manifestations of this desire, like the National Storytelling Festival held every year in Jonesboro, Tennessee.
Oh, that event is incredible.
Thousands of people travel from all over the world to gather in these massive canvas tents. They sit shoulder to shoulder on folding chairs for hours just to hear human beings tell stories out loud.
It is the closest physical manifestation we have left to the communal oral tradition at scale.
It completely refutes the idea that we've outgrown the village square. The desire for the gathered circle hasn't evaporated. It's just been paved over by convenience.
Yeah, the architecture of our daily lives has shifted dramatically. We don't have parlors with storytelling chairs anymore. We have living rooms oriented around high-definition screens. We don't gather in village squares. We scroll through endless personalized feeds.
But the human animal navigating that modern architecture is the exact same creature that sat around a burning fire 50,000 years ago, relying on a shared narrative to survive the night.
Exactly.
So what do we do with this realization? Let's just recap the journey we've taken through these sources. We started by looking at the silent 19th century parlor, where the designated storytelling chair was left empty by the arrival of broadcast signals.
We trace the roots of that isolation back to the mass printing press.
Right, which fundamentally altered our psychology by turning the shared, real-time event of a story into a solitary, silent consumer product. We unpack the mechanics of folklore, seeing how campfire, ghost stories, and urban legends weren't just cheap thrills, but vital survival warnings and communal glue.
And we arrived at the understanding that our modern obsession with long-form podcasts, audiobooks, and sleep stories is really just us wandering through a hypervisual digital age, desperately searching for the warmth of the old village campfire.
Searching for that warmth.
And recognizing that trajectory gives us agency over our habits. We cannot uninvent the mass printing press, and we certainly aren't going to throw our smartphones into a river, but we can fundamentally change how we choose to listen.
Totally.
We can recognize that when we put our earbuds in to listen to a voice in the dark, we are tapping into a deeply ancient lineage.
Mm.
But we must also acknowledge that an audio file is still a proxy. It's a simulation of the real thing.
We can't rewind history, but we can be incredibly intentional about the physical spaces we choose to build in our own homes. Which actually brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with, something that builds on everything we've unpacked today, but points to a very real question about the future.
What's that?
Well, if our brains and our nervous systems are so deeply hardwired for this ancient communal campfire, if we physically require the breath and presence of a storyteller to fully empathize and connect, what happens to the generation currently growing up right now?
Oh, the iPad generation.
Right. We are looking at a generation whose very first introduction to narrative isn't the imperfect, pausing, warm voice of a parent reading a book at the edge of the bed. Instead, it's a perfectly optimized, hyper-stimulating, solitary video on an iPad screen. Are we going to see a fundamental mutation in how we empathize with each other when the foundational blueprint of storytelling is entirely stripped of human presence?
That's a sobering thought.
It is. So tonight, when you take your earbuds out, think about a memory, a fear, or an experience you've been carrying entirely by yourself. What would happen if, instead of typing it out for an algorithm or keeping it locked in your own head, you simply sat down in a room, pulled up a chair, and told it out loud to the person sitting next to you? You might just find the fire is still going,